Melanie asked me this. She said, "What was the first artifact you found when excavating at the Pleasanton Meadows site and the Alameda-331 site? What was the most interesting artifact you uncovered at both sites?" Well, the Pleasanton Meadows site was very different than the Alameda 331 site. The 331 site was a very rich, late period midden site. And from the very first trowel of dirt or shovel of dirt in your screen, we were finding artifacts. It was a very rich site, as Bay Area shell mounds tend to be. It was maybe 1,000 years old. People had lived there. We were finding house floors, and there were burials on the site. And it was just a very rich site. It was a very dirty site too. End of the day, I'd look in the mirror while I was driving home. It's like, oh man, I hope I don't get pulled over by the highway patrol, because you're just greasy and dirty, and but I love it. And that grease and that dirt on you is history. It's people's laughter and stories and tears, and it's love, and all the different things that go into making a culture is in that archaeological record. And it would take weeks to get the dirt out of the creases of my fingers. It was that greasy. And that's what the middens are like. Very different experience at Pleasanton Meadows. Pleasanton Meadows was a much older site, 5, 6, 7,000 years old. It was deeply buried. The midden, if there had ever been midden there, had all leached out, so it didn't look dark like the Alameda 331 site. It didn't get your hands dirty in the same way. And also, we didn't find the types of artifacts. It may have been that we weren't in the main part of the site, or it may be that the site was much more ephemeral. It wasn't necessarily a village where people lived 24/7, but maybe a seasonal camp. And that's what I suspect it was. The first artifact I found at Pleasant Meadows, and first artifact that any of us found, because it was such hard excavating that most of the students started complaining after a few days, a few Saturdays, that, we're not finding anything. And you'd go over and look at the creek wall and see how deep the site was and come back. It's like, man, these students are moving so slow because the dirt was so hard to dig. It was adobe clay that we're never going to get down. So after, I think, 4 or 5 Saturdays, Smitty gave in to the students and moved them to 331, which he knew would be easier to excavate and would be better because they would actually find things. We weren't finding anything because we were digging overburden at Pleasant Meadows. Well, I really didn't want to leave because I was curious about what was going to be in my unit. So I came back all that summer under independent study and continued excavating down until I got into the cultural. So my unit was the only unit that actually got into the archaeological period sediments. And what I first found, I found this beautiful, beautiful deer bone, ulna bone awl. So people had taken the ulna bone from a deer and they had fashioned it into a sewing awl. And it was absolutely gorgeous. And I can still picture it in my mind. Actually, I have a photograph that I've sent to the C.E. Smith Museum. So if you're interested, you can find that photograph and see it. That was the first thing I found at Pleasant Meadows. And it was probably the only really thing that you would brag about to someone that wasn't an archaeologist. But I also found a hammerstone, and I found what might have been an elk bone wedge. And I found a few pieces of quartzite chipping debris, debitage, and a lot of faunal material, a lot of burned animal bones that people had eaten. So, but the bone awl is the one thing I can really picture. Now, over at Alameda 331, goodness, we were finding charm stones, haliotis pendants, obsidian projectile points. But the thing I found there that was most important to me is I was excavating a house floor and I found a cooking hearth cut into the ground of the floor. And it was baked earth and it was full of charcoal and ash and just all types of seashells and animal bones. And that's when I became an archaeologist. Those beautiful artifacts are fine. That's what you put in a museum. But when I looked at the house floor, and in the middle of it, I saw this baking oven, and I was able to peel it out, excavate it a little bit at a time, and see history unfold. Someone had sat there and had the final meal in that baking earth oven, and then they'd filled it in with their debris from that meal. And it was a lot. There was Cerathidia shells, which came out of the bay, the little, I think they're called horn snails. There was clamshell, and I think there was some oyster shell and bird bones, wading birds, big wading birds that had been consumed, and maybe some deer bones. And it's like, these people really ate well. And you start seeing how history lays itself out in the archaeological record, and realize that this was a great place for people to live. They were there for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not longer, in that particular village, and life was really good there. And as an archaeologist, it feels good when you can start seeing things like that. And you realize archaeology is more than finding beautiful ulna deerbone awls. It's seeing history and seeing the knowledge that can come from that. And at 331, you could really see it in the dirt. Right there in the dirt, you could see it. So of all those two projects, 331 and out Pleasanton Meadows, I think it was seeing the dirt, seeing that baked earth with the charcoal and the ash and all the fauna that I would say was the most striking and my favorite memory of being able to read the ground, read it right there in the dirt. And archaeologists can do that. Geologists and soil scientists can do it also. But archaeologists like to read the dirt, and that's where I could see that. Another of Melanie's questions was this. She asked, what was your first excavation like at the Pleasanton Meadows site? What were you feeling on the first day? Nervous, scared, excited? All of that. Yeah, all of that. I'd been out to the site a week earlier in class. Smitty had said that we need to fence the site off. The property had an owner, and it was going to be developed for homes, and the owner had leased it out to a cattle grazer, so there were cows out there, and we were going to be digging some deep units to get down to this buried site. So Smitty or the rancher or both said, we need to really fence this off. So we're in class, and Smitty says, I need some volunteers to go out and put up some barbed wire fencing. This friend of mine, George Rogers, who I just met in class, and we kind of bonded, we kind of looked at each other, and I had heard George had said something about, George had just come out of the Marine Corps, and he had been over in Vietnam a couple of years earlier, and I'd heard him say something about stringing wire. And at the time, I had a pretty strong Southern accent. I just moved here to California from the state of Georgia a few years earlier, and George, who came from Boston, mistook my accent and thought I was from Texas, and he assumed I was a cowboy. And he figured, well, cowboys know how to put up barbed wire fence. So I looked at George, and he looked at me, and we both figured the other knew what they were doing, so we volunteered to do it. And we were the only two people that volunteered. So we got the job. So we had to go out to the site, and I think it took us 2 days. And we had a stretcher and a lot of barbed wire and some post hole diggers. And we had to put up like 1,200 feet of fencing, one long fence, about 1,200 feet long. And it's a wonder we didn't die. We broke the wire a couple times and had this barbed wire go flashing by our faces at speed of light. But we managed to do it. And so we got a good look at the site. We also bonded out there, and that's why we're still friends for life. And but we got a good look at the site, and you could look down into the creek, the Arroyo Los Pasitas, and you could see this buried midden down there. And it was so exciting to wonder what we were going to find. So when my first day came to excavate, I was really excited, a little nervous probably about who I'm going to have as a pit partner. I ended up having this great guy, can't remember his name, but I had a wonderful pit partner who I spent the next 7 Saturdays excavating, 8 Saturdays excavating with at the 2 sites. But after starting the excavation, I was hooked. And I ended up doing it for my career. I ended up excavating and doing research on 5 continents all over the world, and giving lectures and writing. And if you end up doing something that you enjoy, you never regret it. And you may not become wealthy as an archaeologist or a musician or a writer, whatever you do, but there's other ways to estimate and to measure value. And I felt like we were doing really good work. Anything that we can do to better our society, and you can do it as an archaeologist, just like you can do it, in many other ways. It feels right, and that really felt right to me. So I was very excited, never looked back, and I'm still doing it almost 50 years later. Melanie asked me this. She asked, did you like excavating at one of the sites over the other? Did you prefer working with several classmates at the Pleasanton Meadows site, or just one other person? Well, between the two sites, Pleasant Meadows was a lot of hard, rigorous work to get down to the cultural zone. And my unit was the only one that managed, only because I went out all through the summer after the class had ended. ALA-394, if you want to see archaeology, that was the better of the two sites, because it was right in your face. From the very first shovelful on the screen, you were finding obsidian depotage and burned animal bones, and you were able to use your head to see what was in your screen. You could see it. Pleasant Meadows was a different type of challenge, and my curiosity got the better of me at Pleasant Meadows, and that's why I was willing to go out all summer. I went out 2 or 3 days a week all through the summer, and if you know the Livermore Valley area, it gets really hot in the summer, so there were days when it was over 110. Now, I was excavating a 10-foot by 10-foot pit, and I was down about 8 feet down when I hit the cultural. So that's like being in the bottom of an oven, and I just baked out there. But I didn't want to stop. I really wanted to see the archaeological site. So I have to tell you, I'm probably crazy to say this, but between the two sites, I was much rather, if I had to go out and do it again, I'd go to Pleasant Meadows again. There's just something about that type of site that really intrigues me. Everybody would want to go to 331, so someone's got to go to Pleasant Meadows, and I guess that would be me. Now, I had a single crew member in that unit at Pleasant Meadows, and I had the same crew member at 331. We paired together, and I can't remember his name. Really, really nice gentleman. The funny thing about archaeology in 1974 is almost all the men in my class, Phil class, were returning veterans from Vietnam. They were all Vietnam veterans, and the guys were going back to school on the GI Bill, and liked the idea of being outdoors and getting their hands dirty, and they went into archaeology. And the thing now I'm noticing is that there's a number of programs being run on archaeological sites today to help returning veterans from the Middle East and Afghanistan. And there's something very therapeutic about doing archaeology. And I could see it in 1974, and I didn't quite understand what I was seeing, because like I say, almost every guy out there was a Vietnam vet, including my pit partner. But now I think we see it in a different way, and we understand the value, and that's why there's a number of programs teaching returning vets to do archaeology, and it's kind of cool when you think about it. And think about it. Why would that be? What is it if you're war traumatized and you come home from serving in Afghanistan or Iraq? What is it about doing archaeology that is therapeutic and healing? And could be a good paper there for somebody. I had a classmate who helped me the summer when I did the extended program, the special credit or independent study, to finish my unit at Pleasant Meadows. Her name was Laura Hunter, and she had been in the class, and she was also curious, so she helped me, and she went out every day I went out. So we had a great time. We became friends for life. We really bonded in the bottom of this very hot oven that we called our unit. So in archaeology, you meet all types of people, and almost always they're going to be really good people. I've only met a couple of people I just soon not work with again. Out of hundreds, if not thousands of people, archaeology tends to, as does anthropology, attract some pretty unique people. And I hope you get a chance to find that out someday. Melanie asked, you mentioned that local Pan-Indians were concerned with protecting the remains found at the Pleasanton site. What native tribe were they from? Well, the remains themselves dated back 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, and I would consider them Proto-Hokan. The native people that were concerned about their protection were members of the Society of American Indians. And that was a local group that had been formed in the Livermore Valley area. And it consisted of people from a variety of tribes, mostly elsewhere. People who had been forcibly or voluntarily moved to the Bay Area, mostly during times of termination and forced assimilation, which was going on in the 40s and 50s quite a bit. So this is 1974. The people that were in that group that I remember working with were mostly middle-aged or older women from the plains, Lakota people and Northern Cree people, and there were a variety of other tribes. I believe I remember someone that was Cheyenne, and there may have been some people from the East Coast as well, some of the Eastern tribes. So it was a pan organization, and although people had not been born in Livermore Valley, they had moved there, the fact that they were indigenous too gave them the necessity to help protect the ancestors, and they were doing their best to do that, and it was an honor to work with them and to help them. If we were to work out there today, we'd work with different people, because the difference in 45 years is now that we have more local indigenous groups that are present, that we would work with, people that are tracing their heritage and ancestry to Ohlone families and to Bay Miwok families, depending on where in the valley. But at the time, we were working with the Society for American Indians, and it was mostly these older Lakota and Cheyenne and Northern Cree women who were doing their best to protect that site. This is the first of two questions that I was asked by Michaela. She asked, once Dr. Smith moved the field school from ALA-394 to ALA-331, did he continue the work with the local Native American tribe to find ways to protect or document the potential burial site? Dr. Smith did not, as far as I know, but his graduate student interns, or TAs, Rob Gordon and Joe Chavoin, who were both grad students at the time, did continue the work with the tribe, or actually tribes. Dr. Smith, by the end of summer, came down with cancer. During the summer, actually during spring even, in the spring, he was having trouble. During the summer, it became very obvious that he was not well, and he saw his doctor and learned that he had cancer of the stomach. So he was sort of out of the picture. But his TAs, Rob and Joe, took over as far as handling the negotiations with the tribes, as far as what Dr. Smith's commitments had been to the tribe. And in fact, worked after I'd finished my analysis of the material. I did a special independent study with Dr. Smith summer of 1974 following the spring excavation, and was able to write up the findings from my unit, which was the only unit that actually penetrated the buried site. Following my analysis, Rob and Joe worked with the Society for American Indians, which was a local pan group in the Tri-Valley area, Livermore Valley area, and they turned over the materials to them, and then the Native people reburied all the things that we had found, as well as all the human remains that neighbors had found in the creek. They were all reburied on a special piece of land nearby that was dedicated for the reburial. There wasn't necessarily one tribe that we were working with. In 1974, a lot of the indigenous people had not organized to the degree that they have now. And pan-Indian groups like the American Indian Movement, who I had worked with in the 70s, and the Society of American Indians were more outspoken and present than they are today. Remembering, because of termination and relocation in the 50s, thousands of Native people were relocated to the Bay Area as part of termination of ancestral lands and some of the things the government was trying to do to force assimilation. So at the time, the San Francisco area, and we still do, has one of the largest Native populations of non-California Native people. So we were working with a group that was composed largely of tribes from back east, Plains people, people from the East Coast, and elsewhere. From Heather. And Heather asked, were there any subsequent digs in the Pleasanton Meadows site? If so, has anything of interest been found regarding the local tribes and/or other human activities? There was a single project that I'm aware of conducted a few years after Cal State Hayward was out there. So sometime in the late 1970s, Ann Peak and Associates. Ann Peak was an archaeologist who had a private consulting CRM business. I believe Ann is gone now. But she had a project either with the water agency or possibly with the development, the neighborhood development, to do more work on the site. And I don't know what she found. I remember talking to her as she was beginning the project, And I don't think I ever saw a final report, but there should be one on file at the Northwest Information Center if anyone's interested. I don't know if she found burials, but I do remember that it was a deeply buried site, which we already knew, and it was an old site from early to mid-Archaic. That's all I know. Very good question. I wish I had a better answer.